Hopefully everybody has a handout. They're at the front. There's two of them. One's in landscape, one's in portrait. The landscape one deals with the books, and the portrait deals with the teacher's manuals. And to really understand wit and wisdom, you have to see both of them together. Welcome. First off, thanks for coming. Thanks for taking time out of your Tuesday morning. And there are three things that cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. And we hope to shine a light on some truth about wit and wisdom today. All right, about Moms for Liberty. We're a national organization. We're quite new. We were founded in January. I heard about it in March, and we started the Williamson County chapter in April. We had our first event in mid-May to a crowd of about 450. It was CRT 101, just trying to teach the community about CRT and what it is and the various forms that it takes. And some of that knowledge that some of you hopefully gained from that event will feed into this event as well. We started to shine a light on the diversity, equity, and inclusion that's on the table in Williamson County, and we branched into taking on the curriculum as well. We formed the Wit and Wisdom Deep Dive team in May, and the Deep Dive team has been working extremely hard ever since. There's 15 parents on that team. And more than 15 parents, because we had some help, put in more than 1,200 hours now, and still counting. So, and it's probably over that. So, and these are our findings that we want to share with you. These findings, the goal is to inform this Thursday's school board work session, in which they're going to discuss their own review of wit and wisdom. And we just want to have our voices heard. So without further ado, I'm the head of the Williamson County chapter. I am an ex-B1 pilot. I did about 1,000 hours over Afghanistan. And now I got a mission upgrade. I'm a full-time mom. And I'm a Williamson County resident. Also presenting today is our Chief of Research, Lori Freeheim. She's a California transplant, came here last summer looking for the freedoms of Tennessee, and she's fighting hard to keep it that way. So a round of applause for her. What we're going to cover today. We've done the intro. We'll do the terminology, so the lingo that you need in order to talk about this stuff. Then we'll go right into the curriculum. Then we'll briefly address critical race theory, and then how it was adopted. So, wit and wisdom, what's all the fuss about? For us, the journey started with the letter from the parents of a second grade child who was suddenly ashamed to be half white, suddenly ashamed to be an American. And we said, hold the press. How did that happen? Where did he get that? Let's start looking at the curriculum. Then more concerned parents started to come forward. And this is all grades. You know, the fourth grade books, my child is reading about this, this, and this. Some first graders that are in therapy. And so we could not ignore this any longer. And again, we formed the Deep Dive team. We hope you find it helpful. Terminology. Social emotional learning. It's a big buzzword, and not many people really know what it means. But it's teaching your child how to cope with feelings, how to manage their emotions, to develop identities, to feel and show empathy. These are all directly pulled from various social emotional learning sites. Everybody's heard these buzzwords, and I think that they have a deeper meaning than anybody really ascribes to them. Critical race theory, quite frankly, is the division of students along racial lines. It's saying to one skin color, you're oppressed, and the other, you're an oppressor, and that there's nothing you can do about it. That's the color of your skin. Lexiles, that's a number assigned to a student's reading level, and it also can be assigned or is assigned to various books. So you hear people within Williamson County schools primarily the assistant superintendent of curriculum, talking about we're striving for a higher lexile. So lexile is the word on the page, but it does not really pertain to the content of what that word is instructing the student about. And finally, trauma-informed pedagogy. Pedagogy is how the teacher instructs your student. It's a fancy word just for that. And have you heard empowering the students recently? If you pick up on it, you hear empowering the students everywhere. And that is really kind of the opening the door on trauma-informed pedagogy. I'll cover the types of curriculum. First off, you have explicit curriculum. So we have a bunch of books on the back table that are the wit and wisdom curriculum. That is explicit curriculum. It's the word on the page, it's the word on the screen. Pretty easy to follow. The implicit is learning that occurs via other means. It can be kind of the background noise. It can be the teacher-led activities, exercises that they do, the subtle hints, maybe the subtle ideology underneath the explicit learning. Null curriculum, did I lose my mic? Null curriculum is curriculum that's not covered. So an example would be the actual history of Marxism or socialism, positive aspects of US history, founding documents. And supplemental, that's a big thing today as well. So you have your state approved curriculum, but then there's this whole other thing about supplemental curriculum. That includes all the websites, BrainPop, Achieve 3000, the Gale database. None of those are regulated, and your teacher can pull as needed from supplemental curriculum. So common threads for wit and wisdom. A lot of people focus on just their child's grade. You know, my child is in 2nd grade, this is what my child has learned. My child is in 4th grade. But when you take a step back and you look at the broader picture of wit and wisdom, shockingly, there's some common threads that run all the way K through 5, and they come up repeatedly, some in every grade, some in every other grade. We found them to be suicide ideation as early as the 1st grade. Then it comes up again in the 3rd grade, 4th grade, and 5th grade. So I should also pause to say that how Wit and Wisdom does its lessons is it's a single book that they read, and then you'll have 20 lessons that just spiral around this book. So they'll read the book on day 1, but then for the following 9 weeks or so, they're just going to get it again and again and again with vocabulary, grammar, art, activities. So if a 1st grader is exposed to suicide ideation, it's not just the explicit curriculum that they've read on the page. They're going to get it again and again and again, and that's really where the danger comes in. Bad white people, that's another common thread, as early as kindergarten. Extreme emotion, that is all grades. You'll find that this curriculum is social emotional learning, and it is laden with extreme emotions. Not happy ones either, mostly dark, sad, angry kind of emotions. Again, every day for your kid. Cannibalism, strangely enough. 1st, 3rd, and 4th grade. And anti-nuclear family in the 1st, 4th, and 5th grade. Anti-America, almost all grades, except for kindergarten. Dark imagery, all grades. We're going to show you a lot of that dark imagery, and you'll see for yourself. Graphic death, all grades. And age-inappropriate topics, all grades minus kindergarten. So end to end, this is a pretty dark curriculum for your child to have for an entire year. Well, K through 5, actually. For the age-inappropriate content, what I'll cover for kindergarten, we consider murder age-inappropriate. 1st grade, graphic mating and gender fluidity. 2nd grade, anti-police, anti-fire. 3rd grade, graphic death, torture, anti-church. 4th grade, rape, murder, adultery, scalping and skinning, stillbirth. And in 5th grade, excessive gore, excessive violence, alcoholism, and promiscuity and harmful relationships. all things that we adults can handle, but these are elementary kids. All right, so let's look at it. You can see for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Kindergarten. Why mosquitoes buzz in people's ears? Mother owl was not at home, for though she usually hunted only at night, this morning she was still out searching for one more tidbit to satisfy her hungry babies. She found one of them dead. Her other children told her that the monkey had killed it. All that day and all that night she sat in her tree, so sad, so sad, so sad. Now, why is this what we choose for a kindergartner? And because the mother owl was so sad, they feared that the sun would never come back. So take a look at the imagery. There's the monkey with the angry teeth killing the baby owl and then focusing on it. All the other animals are angry as well. Mother owl said, "Monkey killed one of my owlets. Because of that, I cannot bear to wake the sun." And just more imagery. Again, I have a kindergartner. This is not really what I want her emphasize or to marinate in every day. First grade. Seahorse, the shyest fish in the sea. Seems pretty innocuous, right? Why would they pick the seahorse for the ocean module? Well, it talks about seahorse mating in graphic detail, actually. They twist their tails together and twirl gently around. Seahorses are faithful to one mate. Today's seahorse's mate is full of ripe eggs. The two of them dance till sunset, and then she puts her eggs into his pouch. No words necessary for that one. So this is where the gender fluidity comes in. Seahorses are the only male fish to get pregnant like this, growing their young inside their own bodies. It's time for the babies to be born. He works hard all day and through the night, bending, squeezing, and pushing, shooting hundreds of babies out of his pouch. And they couldn't find something different than this book. Then the kids are shown, it's actually quite fascinating video at the end. And it's about a 3-minute video. We're on board with it until about the last 10 seconds. We humans tend to think of who we are as mostly fixed, but in the ocean, identity can be a fluid and mysterious thing. So you're planting the seed in the mind of a first grader about gender fluidity. That's all it takes. The teacher's manual asks the question, how do seahorses mate? How do seahorses give birth? Only the male seahorse can get pregnant. Male seahorse gives birth. The dad seahorse works hard. And the main topic is how seahorses have babies. So not only did they read the book, but just in case they missed it, the teacher's manual is going to go over and over and over again. Brave Irene. It's a pretty sad story, actually, of brave Irene walking through the snow in miserable circumstances to take this dress. So it was her grandmother. But she had fallen off a little cliff. Only her hat and the box in her hand stuck out above the snow. Even if she could call for help, no one would hear her. Why not freeze to death, she thought, and let all these troubles end? Why not? She was already buried. But it gets worse. Look at the teacher's manual. It instructs the students to think of a scene from the text that showed how Irene was brave. Then they should stand it up and act it out silently. And it gives a few examples of scenes that they can act out. One of them, at the end, Irene gets buried by the snow and almost dies, but then digs out of the snow. So let's act out the suicide ideation in this book. Not to mention the other examples are pretty dismal. Walks through the snowstorm even though she's hurt. It's dark and she's alone. She fights with the wind. Where's the happiness for our young ones? Feelings. The dragon's gigantic mouth opened. Thousands of teeth shone in the dark. The smell of eaten children filled the boy's nostrils. Alicia has the most beautiful curly hair of all my friends. Curly hair? I like to choke Alicia. Elizabeth likes her more than me. What's wrong with straight hair? I hate Alicia. And then snarling teeth. Grr. This one is about Whiskers the mouse. Whiskers died. Poor Whiskers. She was old. She was sick. She had to die sometime. My heart is broken. We'll miss you, Whiskers. The thing is that the kids have to take this home and focus on the death of Whiskers for at least 2 more nights after they read this. This shows you the angry imagery. That's, like I said, it's a common thread, K through 5. It's just angry, dark, emotional imagery. This child, well, I don't need to explain that. So here's the teacher's manual for feelings. Things to point out. For their activities, explain the students will focus on one feeling, either furious or sad, even though there are more feelings represented in the book. So even if they want to do happy, it's not an option. They get to put furious or sad. For the furious part, on page 5, there's a picture of a girl who could be furious. She tries to kick the boy and is yelling at him. On page 9, a lot of the kids look really mad at John. On page 11, Kate looks really furious. She has a mad face and is growling and says, I hate Alicia, in all caps. Page 16 and 17, the boy is yelling at another boy and his face looks really furious. The words coming out of his mouth are in all caps. And he says that gets him mad when somebody takes his things. Again, furious. Eyebrows are pointing down, yelling no. Furious again. And again. There's the girl and the boy look sad with the loss of Whiskers. I see a little kid crying. Bob looks sad about giving a sundial to Alfred for his birthday. He is frowning. This is just again and again and again. And then the same thing for the extensions down here. Sad, nervous, afraid, is sick. You get the point. This is easier to read. Students may say the boy looks sad that he threw the airplane. Another way to describe that feeling is ashamed or embarrassed. Remember this part, because it's going to come up later. Ashamed means feeling bad about yourself, usually because you did something wrong, and embarrassed means experiencing feelings of shame or unease. Again, this will come up later. In the teacher's manual for feelings, 506 pages, the word feel or feelings is mentioned more than the page count, 639 times. This is social emotional learning, emphasis on the emotional. How many times is mad, angry mentioned? 154. It almost doubles everything else. Sad is next, which almost doubles happy. Then scared, heartbroken, miserable, and look how few times happy is mentioned, as well as the other positive feelings, and joy having the lowest tally of all. Believe it or not, this is a Cinderella story called The Rough-Faced Girl. She's an Indian girl, but her sisters make her sit by the fire, and the ashes and the embers singe her face and char her hair. Then later on in the story, she is promised to marry a spirit being. So what message does that send? I'm not even sure about that one. And then towards the end of the story, it's maybe a little bit graphic, depicting her washing off the charred stuff. 2nd grade. Everybody's heard a lot about this one. Johnny Appleseed. I saw the Johnny Appleseed book. I was like, great, what could be wrong with Johnny Appleseed? Well, about 3/4 into it, there it is, the bad white people. The white men who chased them from their homes. Johnny did not like people to fight. He tried to make peace between the settlers and the Indians. And there, the imagery again is the angry settlers. So, when they read Johnny Appleseed, what are they going to remember? Teacher's manual says, why did the pioneers chase the Indians from their homes? And this is what you get when you drill this into kids every day. In the wilderness, Johnny's mother and little brother died. His dad remarried another woman, and he left the house because he has too many brothers and sisters. Then he met some animals and Indians. He planted seed everywhere. When Johnny got ill, he died. There was no joy in that. Okay, the buffalo are back. This is all talking about how the white men killed the buffalo. They forced many Indians to go to reservations and sold the land to settlers. So if you're following Johnny Appleseed with this book, you see the recurring theme, right? These are not isolated. The government broke its treaties with the Indians. Soldiers and settlers were encouraged to shoot every buffalo they saw or drive whole herds over the cliffs. Most of the wild buffalo went down in dust and gunfire, a death wind for the prairie. Here's an activity in the teacher's manual. The children are supposed to cut out the response cards and group them into piles of good and bad. So based on what they've taught, where do you think the government and the settlers and probably Theodore Roosevelt goes? And here's the outcome. Why was the government so mean to Indians? That's all they're going to remember from this story, and that's the point. Or I would submit that that's the point. This more pertains to the lexile of wit and wisdom. It likes to talk about its lexile, but there's a lot of books, this one included, where it gives you a warning that this book is at a challenging reading level for partner reading in grade 2, thus heavy scaffolds are needed to analyze the text. Well, why don't we just do a text that they can actually read and analyze without heavy scaffolding? Many have seen this book. There's a lot of problems with this book. And I'm going to go over the imagery, and then we'll come back with the teacher's manuals later. Quoting, though, they have generally dirty hands, face, neck, and ears. Mexicans are inferior to whites in personal hygiene and their scholastic ability. In what other respects are they inferior? In their economic outlook, in their clothing, and their ability to take part in the activities of the school. White students are superior to Mexicans. Does the book ever take pains to correct this at the end? No. So what is the student going to absorb from this? From this imagery. And this is Mexican children at the Mexican school eating lunch behind an electric fence where cows and manure on the other side. That was included, surrounded by flies. Mexican children outside the white pool with a sign, no dogs or Mexicans allowed. So your second graders just barely able to read. And this is the sign we're going to give them. Moving on. Imagery of firemen spraying black children with hoses so hard that it bruises their bodies and tears their clothes off. I, as an adult, don't want to see this picture. So I don't think it should be beaten into our second graders. These things happen, yes, but do we need to drill it into our second graders? This page talks about angry white people, black children in a white school. Some wanted to hurt her. The crowd seemed ready to kill her. Men and women and children shouted at her. Moving on to the third grade. So there's a marine life module. And this is an excerpt of that. So shark attack. Now I think sharks are fascinating creatures. I love Shark Week. My kids love Shark Week. Well, it's age appropriate. But this is what we're going to teach about sharks. If you can't see, he's got blood coming out of him, pouring out of his side. The shark has the man's leg in his mouth, and his friends are trying to pull him out. shark attack that took place in a very unexpected place, a creek. A 12-year-old boy was swimming, screamed, and disappeared beneath the water. A man jumped in to drag Lester's lifeless body from the water. Suddenly the man felt something bump his right leg. When he reached down, he realized part of his leg had been ripped away. They had been attacked by a shark. Both of them died. And of course, the imagery of the lifeless boy in his arms. Amos and Boris, this book has a lot of extreme emotion in it, but our main problem with it is he began to wonder what it would be like to drown. Would it take very long? Would it feel just awful? Would his soul go to heaven? Would there be other mice there? So there it is, suicide ideation cropping up again in the 3rd grade. Crazy with rage, Amos screamed and punched at Boris until he remembered he owed his life to the whale. And just as the whale was preparing to die, dark topics, extreme emotion. Coming to America. Honestly, it's an inspirational story. Pictures of Ellis Island, what made this country great. But sadly, new arrivals are often treated poorly by other Americans just because they looked or act differently. Imagery of turning away the immigrants with health problems, with the screaming child saying goodbye to a loved one. Starry Messenger, Galileo. I want my kids to learn about Galileo. Maybe not like this, though. You'll find that this whole book is extremely anti-church. His fame grew. By now the church began to worry. Galileo had become too popular by upholding the idea that the earth was not the center of the universe. He had gone against the Bible and everything the ancient philosophers had taught. He had gone against the church. Galileo was ordered to stop believing what he could see with his own 2 eyes. He was summoned to appear before the Pope. Galileo was afraid. He knew that people had suffered terrible torture and punishment for not following tradition. It could happen to him. I don't know if you can see this in the back, but this is a man hanging on the wall that's been tortured. On the opposite wall as well. And these are heads, not all of them human, hanging on the wall. This book has a lot of pagan imagery in it, and he in the center is surrounded by a long serpent with flames. Galileo was condemned to spend the rest of his life locked in his house under guard, but he still had stars on his mind. He was tried in the Pope's court, and everyone could see the stars had left his eyes. So how does this portray the church? It's pretty evil, actually, pretty condemning, pretty dark. And then not only that, but here's the Grim Reaper. Here's other just pagan symbols surrounding him. And this imagery, where does that come from? So this teacher's manual is a lot of anti-church, it's a lot of anti-tradition. What tradition did people just follow during the time of Galileo? Most people just followed the tradition that the earth was the center of the universe. Why did people just follow tradition during the time of Galileo? People just followed tradition because people had believed the same thing, because the church supported it. Galileo, the church was worried because Galileo challenged its traditions, so they punished him harshly. The church's reaction shows that tradition was very important in the time of Galileo. The stars had left Galileo's eyes because he was afraid. He wrote a book that went against tradition. He said the earth was not the center of the universe. The church told him to stop believing the earth was the center of the universe, even though he had proof. The illustration shows Galileo being called to see the leader of the church. He was worried that he would be tortured because of his belief. Another reason the stars had left his eyes because the church found him guilty of heresy. 4th grade. George versus George. We see George Washington every day. A show of hands who's seen an angry George Washington. This is the first illustration of that, and this is introducing kids to an angry George Washington. George versus George. pulls out, when he captures our citizens at sea, they must either fight against their own countrymen or kill themselves. Up here at the top, each side told a different tale about Lexington and Concord. Rebel newspapers reported that bloodthirsty redcoats burned houses, drove naked women into the streets, and butchered old men and infants. Then they scalped fallen British infantry and cut off their ears. Coming over to this page, besides constantly stealing food and horses, they burned entire towns and villages, looted or seized people's houses, raped and murdered innocent civilians, set fire to crops and timberland. British troops locked prisoners in filthy prison ships where they died like flies. Indians fighting alongside the British burned almost 1,000 homes, tortured and killed whole families, and scalped the dead, believing that it would make them more powerful. Some Indians honored their bravest victims by eating them. Cannibalism again. For revenge, rebel troops sent by George Washington destroyed 41 Native American villages, many of which were peaceful, burned all their crops and orchards, and they collected scalps and showed off pairs of leggings made from the skin of dead Indians. And to this day, George Washington is known as Town Destroyer. So that's what I just read. But then if you look at the imagery, people shooting children running out of a burning house. They're torching a house right here with the little girl inside, and the shooting of the Indians. Hatchet. Pretty mature content. In the mall, every detail. His mother sitting in the station wagon with the man, and she leaned across and kissed him. Kissed the man with the short blonde hair, and it was not a friendly peck, but a kiss. The blonde man who was not his father and kissed mouth to mouth. Saw this thing that his mother did with the blonde man, saw the kiss that became the secret that his father still did not know about. Later in the book, to where he wanted to die, he had settled into the gray funk deeper and still deeper until finally in the dark he had gone up on the ridge and taken the hatchet and tried to end it by cutting himself, but the cutting had been too hard, impossible to do, and he had last fallen to his side, wishing for death, wishing for an end. And this is in a COVID year. All right. Mythology, awesome. Oh, wait. The Furies were 3 goddesses of vengeance wearing long black robes fastened around the waist with snakes. They had serpents twined to their long white hair and coiled around their arms. Blood dripped from their black eyes. And on this side, the Furies are unleashed on some murderers. But the men, seeing the dark flapping shapes, approached and ran in terror, but they could not escape. They lashed their whips till the murderers bled. They tore snakes out from their hair and hurled them at the killers' backs. Down the snakes slid, winding, twisting, but never biting. Instead, they exhaled poisonous fumes, which is what that is. It affected men's minds, and the men began to rave. The Furies chased and tormented the murderers until at last they went mad. Such was the punishment of the Furies. But for who among us has never done anything wrong? So it ends with you could be a victim of the Furies too. Zeus had his own son, Pelops, cooked up and served as a meal. Introduction to demon. Some pretty horrible, haunting imagery right there, and I would submit that even the angel doesn't look quite right. Role-playing death, and Aphrodite coming out of the sea. Some would consider that to be a little much for a 4th grader. Pushing up the sky, here's another, cannibalism comes back up again. Cannibalism in myths. It might seem unusual, but many myths include stories of people, mainly children, who were sliced, cooked, and eaten. However, the victims were sometimes coughed up whole or rescued and put back together as good as new. Walk 2 moons. Teacher's manual states, the sophisticated cognitive work builds a foundation for critical thinking, including concepts related to social justice. If you were at CRT 101, then you know what that means. So I went back. There's multiple warnings for Walk 2 Moons about the emotionally mature material throughout. Give your students a warning about the emotional content. The concluding chapters contain much sadness and loss. As emotions will be strong, students will read too quickly. Then I would submit, why have this book? If you need all these warnings, there's a lot of beautiful literature out there. Pick something in that pile. All right. Talks about how she broke her leg. I heard my mother calling. Her voice was distant and faint. My mother found me and carried me back. But the baby came that night, so her mother was pregnant. I heard my father telephoning the doctor. She won't make it, he said. It's happening now, right now. Something's wrong. She saw me standing there and said, you shouldn't watch. My mother screamed, just one long, mournful wail, and then it was quiet. When the doctor carried the baby out of the room, I asked to see it. It had pale bluish tinge, and there were marks on its neck where the umbilical cord had strangled it. It might have been dead for hours, the doctor said, told my father. I just can't say exactly. The doctor whispered that it's a girl. I asked if I could touch her. She was still a little warm from being inside my mother. Thought maybe, I thought maybe if I held her, she would wake up. The baby, it didn't make it. I'll hold the baby, she said. It didn't make it, he repeated. It can't be dead, she said in that same sing-song voice. It was alive just a minute ago. I slept beside her. When he turned on the light, I saw the blood spread out all across the bed. It had soaked the sheets and the blanket. It had soaked the white plaster of my cast. In the next 2 days, she wouldn't stop bleeding. Later, my mother said they took out all of my equipment. She could not have any more babies. I drew a round head with curly hair, put a rope around the neck, and attached it to the tree. 5th grade. Are we having fun yet? I submit the kids aren't having fun with this. So this is, it's a listening story, so it's not an explicit thing, a curriculum that I can show you, but it does have a commentary in the teacher's guide. It says, listen and try to picture the characters and events in their minds. Well, here's something that's going on. Discovering that the monster had eaten all the people, Coyote tricked the creature into eating him. Once inside, he first cut out the monster's heart and then cut up its body. When he was done, Coyote washed his bloody hands and sprinkled the wash water across the valleys. Okay, thunder rolling in the mountains. This is examples of excessive violence. Setting fire to their tent, shoot a soldier. I shot him too, to kill us. The soldier's bullet went in the back of his shoulder and came out through his chest. So many bullets. Soldiers shot at their heads and killed all. We will kill them all. Killed all of the soldiers. Kill you. Kill them. Murder. Kill the old man. Took his knife. Set the monster's heart from its body. The antelope fell dead. Oh, good. It continues. I saw myself killed. I will kill. We are all going to die. Smashed his rifle butt into her face. Killed another white man. Whip that had an iron tip. Wiping the blood from his knife. I felt a noose slip around my neck. It drew tight and the world went black. The bullet struck him in the head. The next bullet struck her in the chest. She got the gun from him and took careful aim and shot him in the face. Swiftly, she grabbed my ear and thrust a needle through it. The bullet would strike him squarely in the back. Bodies strewn across the ground. I saw the dead people. It was the white man. Hated the whites. Murdered by a white man. Hated the whites. They were all enemies. Then whites decided something. He was a wicked man, and he would kill me if he could. Killed white men. White generals are men with 2 faces and 2 tongues, driven off by whites. White scavengers will steal their locusts, and they'll devour us. Gore. Tied hand and foot, burned by the sun, tongue lulled out of his mouth, around his neck is sign. Bodies boiled alive would wash ashore for days after, blood soaked through the stretchers from the stumps of legs. Saw a boy had been shot full in the face, amputated Noah's arm, blood-slick years of war. The swollen carcasses of dogs lay about, and even a dead horse, half in a cut of water, red with its blood. Left arm was gone, blood-soaked bandages, gray corpse faces eaten away by the fish, the bridal veil snagged in the bride's skeleton shoulder. She saw their ghosts, dying all around them, had lost their limbs. It gets better. He's drunk. All men are drunkards. They were half drunk, smoking their old El Sol cigars and drinking from small silver cups, some of them staggering drunk, drunk reeling, drunk and fighting drunk. I had to get him drunk to take his arm. The brazen little hussy. What men do best is walk away from women. My husband has any interest in that painted up little floozy. I've held on to my husband, unlike some I can name. She may come in handy, she is meant for men, restless small town men can get. Pressed her feather fan against her bosom and cast great fringed eyes up at him. Cabbage roses bloomed on her chest. She had a powerful effect on the male sex. This is a video that they have to watch, The Cause, from the Civil War series. Putting this slide's presentation together, these images haunt me. We're talking about elementary kids here. This is a lot of words, but this book reminds me a lot of Catcher in the Rye, how it's written and the things that it says. And then I think, well, when did I read Catcher in the Rye? High school. This is 5th grade. So how is those Lexiles working out for us? Now we'll do a deeper look at Wit and Wisdom's implicit curriculum, and I'll hand it over to Lori.
Can everyone hear me? All right, can everyone hear me? Okay, well, just first of all, I just want to say that I do love and support our teachers. I mean, this is a presentation on the curriculum. It is not a judgment on the teachers. So I just wanted to clear that up. And also, let me just say that, history, the good, the bad, the ugly, it definitely needs to be taught. But the content, it needs to be age appropriate. If you want to go ahead and show traumatizing material to your children, please do that, privately in your own home. Don't expose all of Williamson County to traumatizing material. So I'm going to go over grade 2, module 3. Now, this is being taught to 7 and 8-year-olds during the first half of spring. And it's taught from early January to mid-March. So injustice for 2nd graders. They spend 9 weeks. Our 7 and 8-year-olds are focusing on injustice. 34 lessons are devoted on injustice. And the teacher's manual, interestingly enough, it mentions injustice 314 times in a book that is 478 pages. And the kids, they're tasked with developing a nonverbal signal for injustice. And the students are instructed to use this nonverbal signal of injustice every single time they hear an example of injustice during this 9-week module. And the lesson, let me dive into the teacher's manual. The lesson on prefixes, they choose injustice, unequal, inequality, unfair. Out of all the words that are out there that have prefixes, why these four? Why do they choose these four? Vocabulary lesson. Protest, refuse, and marching. And let me just give you an idea of what these lessons are like. I summarized day 1 for you, lesson number 1. And these quotes are directly from the teacher's manual. So right over here, point out the word injustice. Explain that unfair and injustice mean the same thing. Injustice is a stronger word. Explain how real people respond to injustice. Explore the word injustice. Reread. How can people respond to injustice? Echo read. What injustices did people face before the Civil Rights Act? Point to the word injustice. I'm not done. Remind the class of the meaning of the word injustice. Explain, read about people fighting injustice. Remind the class of the meaning of injustice. And it just goes on and on and on. And this is only lesson 1. This is every single day for 9 weeks straight in 2nd grade. Let me just fast forward to day number 32. The children, the students are asked, how can children respond to injustice? How can responding to injustice impact the world? And one of the last questions that they're asked at the very end to answer is, what will you do to make the world a more fair or just place? Now, this is a leading question. It's suggestive. It's framed in a way that it implies that there is no justice and fairness. And let me also remind you that these are not college students reading this. These are 7 and 8-year-olds going through this for 9 weeks. Over here, the children, this is a handout, day 5. The children are expected to learn a protest song. Now, I know that it's against school policy that curricula teach incorrect English grammar. Well, right over here in this handout, you see lots of examples of children studying, grammatically incorrect English. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. And out of all the places they're learning this, they're learning it in an English language arts program. Now, going back to separate is never equal. Now, children are reading these words. These are quotes from the book. Now, this is a non-fiction narrative. This is a real person who said these racist things about Mexicans, and the children are reading this. Children at the Mexican school are inferior to whites in personal hygiene and in their scholastic ability. Mexican children are inferior in their economic outlook, in their clothing, and their ability to take part in activities. White students are superior to Mexicans, and these statements are not denounced as false in the pages that follow. So what are our 2nd graders walking away reading this? And then, that was day 24. Day 27, these statements, they're read again and again on day 28 as well. And the students are to write a narrative from the point of view of this little girl, Sylvia, who sat there and she had to listen to all of these racist remarks. And not only do they have to do this writing assignment once, they have to do it twice. So it turns out that this book is too complex, and this is from the reading manual. It turns out that this book is too complex for second graders to read, so it has to be read aloud to them in the next couple lessons. And one of the selling points of Wit and Wisdom is that our kids are reading at higher lexile levels. Well, in this section of this module, they're not doing very much reading. The teachers are reading to them, and they're spending a lot of time looking at the pictures instead of reading them. And it makes me think, why are we giving our second graders books that have lexile numbers that are way out of range of their ability to read? I mean, they're trying really hard to get this book in the curriculum. Day 24. So before the text is even read aloud, the teacher's manual deliberately sets aside time for the students to make these long observations of very highly inflammatory illustrations of Mexicans that are demeaning to Mexicans. Over here, the children, Mexican children, are portrayed like animals behind bars. Over here, they're portrayed as inferior as dogs. And over here, they're portrayed as inferior as cows. And the children are to do an in-depth analysis of this repeatedly. On day 25 in the teacher's manual, the students are asked again, what is something that you noticed and wondered about these illustrations? They really want them to analyze these. Day 24, the children are reading. A young white boy yelled, "Go back to Mexican school, you don't belong here." Day 19, this is a handout given to the kids in class. It's a lesson on paragraph expansion. And in this narrative, right over here, it says, "I see many white people yelling at us. Why are they being so mean? I want to cry." Day 27. This was on why did the Mendez family fight for desegregation? The Mendez family, this is her family here. And they're given these response cards here with essentially that question. And we looked in the teacher's manual for the questions that they're looking for. So why did the Mendez family fight for desegregation? They fought so white people would stop thinking they were better than Mexican people. Day 27. So they're given another handout right over here. And so after Sylvia's family fought for desegregation, she's saying in the book, I don't want to go to school anymore. The white kids are mean. So she doesn't want to go to the school that has white kids because the white kids are mean. Day 31. So the children are given this handout. This is a reading assessment that is done in class. This is not taken home. It is not seen by parents. If you see them, it is probably given to you at the very end after the module is already over. And if you look closely at the words here, they met hate every day, including from an all-white police force. They expected unfair arrests, beatings, or worse from police. To the black community, one man stood for more hate than any other person in Birmingham. Bull Connor was the commissioner of public safety. This meant that he led police and fire departments. I'm thinking, out of all the things that they could have put in a reading assessment, why this anti-white, anti-police narrative? And then they show the children this historical photograph of racial violence. And evidently, this has literally traumatized children in Williamson County. White firemen blasting their water at black people, bruising them, and having their clothes taken off. So, you know, that photograph, it supports the anti-white, anti-police narrative that they're pushing in their in-class reading assessments. Over here, back to D1, the teacher's manual, we read it. It sets aside a lot of time for the second graders to make long observations of these photographs here. And so they deliberately want our children to do an in-depth analysis of these photographs. Here are some quotes from the teacher's manual. What do you notice about the images? They should notice and wonder about the images. Pause to give students extra time to notice the details of this photograph. Now here, the N-word. Now children are shown this painting here. And if you can see closely, it has the N-word painted right here at the top. And if you look at the teacher's manual, right over here, we have the excerpt. The teacher's manual instructs the teacher to teach the N-word to second graders. And over here, it says, discuss how words can be used to attack and disrespect people. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't teach my daughter the F word or any other foul language. And I know that at some point, my child is going to hear these words. But the last place I would expect my child to learn about the N-word is from her second grade teacher. We're on day number 14. So this lesson here is from the teacher's manual. It's a lesson on adjectives. So they're shown this picture right over here of a crowd of white people. And the teacher's manual says it's a big crowd of people that want to be violent. And the children, these second graders, are tasked with brainstorming adjectives to describe this crowd of white people. And the examples that the teacher uses is angry, scary, mean, loud. Day 15. This is a lesson on adjectives and adverbs. To describe the white people again. The teachers are instructed to use the words vicious and rudely during a lesson on sentence expansion. Now, just to revisit, this is day 16 here. There was a large crowd of angry white people that gathered. Some wanted to hurt her. Some are ready to kill her. The men and women and children shouted at her. And let's see. Day 16, they're supposed to write a narrative from the point of view of Ruby Bridges. So this assignment is inflicting the psychological distress of Ruby Bridges' experience onto our students. And if this wasn't enough discomfort, on day 21, a week later, the students are to role play one page from her experience. We're on day 19. Now this is the very last page of the book of the story of Ruby Bridges. And it doesn't have an ending of unity and integration. And she's praying to God, asking God to forgive the white people because they do not know what they are doing. So what do we want our children to be walking away with when they read this as the last page? Are we supposed to just forgive white people because they are mean, ignorant, and they hate God? It says, just like you did those folks a long time ago when they said terrible things about you. So she's comparing white people to people who spoke badly about God a long time ago. Day 30. Again, The students are tasked with writing another narrative of either Ruby or Sylvia's experience. And they specifically chose scenes here. She enters one empty classroom, when she goes back to school. They specifically chose scenes where they were feeling mistreatment by white people. So they're only focusing on the negative, and none of the positive outcomes. Just a few closing points here. So without seeing all the teaching materials involved in this module, one cannot begin to grasp the high level of manipulation that is affecting the young minds of our impressionable second graders. They do not have the level of maturity or the capacity to think critically yet. They don't have enough knowledge of U.S. history or enough experience in their life to provide adequate context to the very narrowly focused wit and wisdom lessons. And so for 9 weeks, wit and wisdom focuses repeatedly and daily on very dark, very divisive slivers of U.S. history. And this narrow and slanted obsession on historical mistakes, it reveals a heavily biased agenda, one that makes children hate their country, hate each other, and hate themselves. And this relentless nature of how these divisive stories are taught, the lack of historical context, and the way the lessons were designed to be taught after looking at the teacher's manual, they all work together to amplify and sow feelings of resentment and shame of one's skin color and fear. And targeting 7-year-olds with 34 daily lessons on past injustices is indoctrinating the next generation to hate America. A country wit and wisdom, they're saying that our country, they're pushing our children to believe that our country is currently still oppressive. And that is the theme in this module. They emphasize that there is still a struggle against oppression. And students, without highlighting the positive accomplishments and the achievements of our country, like unity and integration, students are failing to learn and appreciate the continual progress of America and the overall improvement of our country since the Civil Rights Movement. They don't understand the concept that we're constantly trying to form a more perfect union. We're trying to find these ways, and we're working hard to do that. And they are failing to appreciate that when they're given this every single day. So we're going to go over laws. I didn't get that slide. They wrote it down. I'm still in this thing.
All right, so we know there's a new anti-CRT law in Tennessee. So now I would submit that wit and wisdom is not entirely CRT. There's a lot of other things in there, but there are pockets, potentially, of CRT. What Lori just covered, could that be considered CRT? Could it violate any tenets of those laws? We'll leave that for others to decide, but here's maybe some ones to look at. From the law, number 1, one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. An individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or another form of psychological distress solely because of the individual's race or sex. Number 8, this state or the United States is fundamentally or irredeemably racist or sexist. 10, promoting division between or resentment of a race, sex, religion, creed, nonviolent political affiliation, social class, or class of people. And in the context of what Lori just covered, here's some words from Dr. Thompson, who spoke at CRT 101.
terms of our public schools and our little ones, I want to talk a little bit about shame. Imagine being aged 11, and either directly or it's implied, hey, your mom, your dad, they're systemically broken. Your great-grandma and great-grandpa or great-great-grandpa, they were slave owners. And because of them, I can't get a job. And as someone said in the back, you're bad. That's shaming. There are psychological underpinnings for the impacts of shame. I'm going to read. This is from the Journal of Anxiety Disorders, Shame and Guilt Proneness, Relationship with Anxiety Disorders in a Clinical Sample. Here's a snapshot from that. Internal shame seems especially relevant to both social anxiety disorder and generalized anxiety disorder symptoms. Remember that. Social anxiety disorder and generalized depression. From the Journal Personality and Individual Differences, a snapshot from there. Their main point: how individuals cope with feelings of shame is an important predictive factor for depressive symptoms. And the final article here that I got from that conservative school, Harvard School Public of Health. Their snapshot. Both shame proneness and guilt proneness were significantly related to higher levels of both PTSD symptoms and somatization symptoms, whereas only shame proneness was significantly related to higher levels of psychological symptoms. Shame brings on anxiety, which can bring on major depressive disorders, and those are the foundational basis for suicidal ideations. Our town in Utah, we have the 4th highest suicide rate between the ages of 11 and 17. And that is based upon anxiety and depression. You do, and you, as I talked about the Hippocratic Oath of do no harm, no matter what your school board does, you need to make sure that it does nothing to increase a child's anxiety or their level of depression. And shame is the #1 and a very powerful way to bring on anxiety and depression, which this is another way of saying that's a very powerful way that you can be pushing your kids to suicide.
This is a 2nd grader. It kind of makes me want to cry, actually. The one on the right is 1st grader. It doesn't look all that joyful to be at the beach. No kid should have those expressions or that posture as a result of curriculum pushed on them. They're defenseless. Which begs the question, how did wit and wisdom get here? I heard it said that Williamson County Schools had 3 to pick from. There's actually 5, not including wit and wisdom. This was the ELA adoption list that was published by the Tennessee Department of Ed. The original list was published on 16 December 19, and then it was updated on the 6th of December to include wit and wisdom, but only grades 3 through 8. So therefore, it was not being considered by Williamson County Schools because they wanted a K through 5. Subsequently, on 9 December, Williamson County Schools publishes the textbook review dates, 3 in January, 2 in February. And the available options were these 5: Amplify, CKLA, Benchmark Advance, Learn Zillion, Expeditionary Learning, McGraw-Hill Wonders, which is what the district had prior to Wit and Wisdom with no issues, as far as I know, and open up expeditionary learning. Well, here's the thing. Wit and Wisdom never actually passed a single state review. In fact, it failed twice. Of all those listed, how did the double-failed curriculum make it before the kids of Williamson County? Now, this is a little bit small, so I'll talk you through this piece of paper here. But the first column, results of main review. Note, the first 3 programs were heavily promoted by the Department of Ed and officials, and they had been piloted in LIFT districts, or 17 LIFT districts in Tennessee. The top 3 were CKLA Amplify, Great Minds, Wit and Wisdom, and Open Up Resources for EL Education. All 3 failed miserably. If you can't see the colors, it's just a bloodbath of red for all the sections that failed. So what happens? They fired those reviewers and they hired new reviewers. They did it again, and we'll cover that. Suddenly, 2 out of the 3 pass. What fails again? It's Wit and Wisdom. A hard fail on kindergarten in the 1st grade, and then 3rd, 4th, and 5th were passed by the DOE after it overruled failed second reviews by re-reviewers. Say that 3 times fast. Therefore, while no waivers were needed for 2 out of 3, 33 waivers were granted for the K through 2nd grade portion of Wit and Wisdom, along with the TDOE promise to create free supplemental material. This is also heavily promoted by SCORE, which is a education lobby advocacy group in Tennessee. So let's look back at wonders. That's what we just had. This is a pass on the first review. All grades passed on the first review for wonders. This is their review rubric, one of 18 pages of it. Some had 20 pages, some had more. And this is for kindergarten, by the way. I just picked 1 grade, the first one. And those are all that's K through 5 for wonders. All green, all pass. Why couldn't we go with that one? Here's the kindergarten grading rubric for Wit and Wisdom. Failed the original review and then failed the second review. But let's look at the rubric. That's it, 1 page. One, grade 2, failed the first, failed the second. But also one thing to note while I'm looking at these pages, there were 5 reviewers for the original review. All of these re-reviews only have 2. Grade 3 is when they change it. Remember that the previous sheet said that the DOE overrode the failed second review, and this is where this happens. It switches to a pass, an overall pass. And they say that despite section 4 failing miserable, they're going to count section 2 as covering section 4, so they're going to pass it. Again in grade 4, and again in grade 5. As a contrast, the CKLA Amplify that passed the second, the re-review, this is what it looks like when it passes. Wit and Wisdom never did that. So how? I have a timeline here. I think you might have taken my paper. Got it. Okay, June 1st of 2019, that's where the story begins. Arguably begins a little bit before that with the appointment of Penny Schwinn in February. But June 1st of 2019 is where we start. The first deadline for newly appointed ELA textbook reviewers came on June 1st of 2019 when they were to submit the results of their first test review, which would prove their ability to follow the rubric and properly score a textbook. The DOE would have received her first warning on June 1st that the instructional materials being piloted by all 12 of the LIFT districts, sorry, I might have spoken on the number of LIFT districts earlier, and sponsored by SCORE were being failed by reviewers and were in danger of not making the approved textbook list. 2 days later, on June 3rd, the department quickly notified publishers of an update to the scoring protocol. Now it's harder to fail a section of a book. Previously, 3 out of 5 reviewers could fail any section of the book, and now 3 out of 5 had to agree to fail the same section. On June 11th, that updated protocol was unanimously adopted. There, right there. On July 2nd, the final review results were in, and despite changing the protocol, it still failed the first review. All 3 programs used in SCORE's pilot districts failed. In August, the process was halted. Textbook review was halted, I believe, 2 months early. DOE hired Johns Hopkins for a high-level review. Make sure I'm not missing anything. The textbook review process was halted indefinitely. And that's when all the reviewers that were part of the initial review were fired. They were dismissed, and they recruited and hired new reviewers through a webinar to perform re-reviews of failing textbooks. So they conducted the new round of reviews September 28th to 29th. Again, only 2 reviewers this time. And usually when somebody does the textbook review, they score in another location. These reviewers were at the DOE with DOE personnel overwatching them. And then it still failed with wisdom. So there it is under the watchful eye of the DOE. October 1st, the waiver application window opens, but in October, I presume, the CKLA and LearnZillion pass at 100%, no waivers required, but Wit and Wisdom and Open Up fail again. DOE overrules and declares they're approved. DOE changes the waiver process for materials already in use. So if a pilot district has materials already in use, then they are permitted to continue to use the failed materials. In all, 70 waivers were ultimately granted by the department so that districts could use failed materials, 33 of which were for Wit and Wisdom, and Williamson County is one of those. November 16th, you guys have already seen this date. That's when the DOE published their ELA adoption list. Wit and Wisdom was added on the December 6th. And then this is our first record of a waiver application. This is December 30th by Sumner County. "33 Tennessee counties have Wit and Wisdom. And this is what I've already told you, but here's a little extra tidbit. Throughout 2020 budget process, the DOE promised districts between $16 to $18 per student for using the textbooks on the state's approval list or those for which a waiver had been granted. Now, when you tally that up, it's not a lot of money. It's at the max, like $460,000, but it's still money. Then the DOE became its own publisher, creating and providing the free supplemental material to prop up Wit and Wisdom. And the bottom line is that from 2019 to 2020, the DOE materially altered, without penalty, the approved adoption process to engineer approvals for repeatedly failed materials. So here we are in Williamson County, starting November of 2019. The textbook adoption committee members are submitted to the board for approval. And December 9th, Williamson County publishes the textbook review days. Again, 3 days in January, 2 days in February. And here's those 3 days in January that occur. Now, during this time, when they published this and were moving towards the review dates, Wit and Wisdom was not an option because it was only billed as 3 through 8. And then somewhere in here is when the DOE said, oh no, if you get Wit and Wisdom, we'll give you free supplemental materials for K through 2nd grade. So it becomes an option. The question is, what was reviewed? at those dates. If in there, wit and wisdom was not initially an option, and that is something that information that we have requested. So to expand out February a little bit, you've got February 3rd and 6th, your first public review dates. On February 13th is when Williamson County applies for the waiver to use wit and wisdom. At that point, let me emphasize, all public review dates were over by the time they applied for their waiver. There was a teacher PD day, which they say wit and wisdom was, and that's professional development, was available for the teachers to look at. On the February 18th, they add an additional public review day and they advertise it in the In Focus. On the 21st, the waiver for wit and wisdom was approved. And on the 22nd, that was the final public review date that was added on at the end, and what we would presume wit and wisdom would have been present at. But let me emphasize this timeline, where a timeline is supposed to start in November, or maybe even before, and go all the way into the spring. This waiver got approved on the 22nd, that's a Friday. The 26th is a Wednesday. So there were 2 working days for the public review, 2 more working days, and then it was recommended for adoption on March, was that the 28th? 2 more working days. Nope. March 1st is the following, March 2nd is the following Monday. So waiver approved, 2 working days for review, and 2 more working days recommended for adoption, and they send it off to the school board to be brought up at their work session on March 26th. But what's happening right here in March of 2020? Nobody is paying attention to the curriculum, and nobody can really be terribly faulted for that. There was a lot going on. Suddenly the school board gets wit and wisdom that just got slid in at the last minute. It was highly reviewed, highly recommended, and they voted unanimously to adopt. So going back to March, there's the vote to adopt, and then in June the House passed, the Tennessee State House became aware of what had just happened, and they passed Public Chapter 770, and the commissioner was stripped of waiver authority and was also no longer a voting member of the textbook commission. Additionally, they put a rider on House Bill 507 in which those 33 waivers for wit and wisdom will dissolve on 1 Jan of 2023. It's supposed to go through 2026. So there's an acknowledged problem there. That's a good thing that those waivers will be up, but to go back to the picture of the second grader, for me, it's not good enough. This was the Williamson County Schools waiver application. What is your rationale for requesting this waiver? Free supplemental material, basically. So there's been talk of money incentives for taking wit and wisdom, and it's been refuted that there were no direct payouts. Well, I don't know that it was ever said that there was a direct payout, but perhaps in the form of a savings and material that you didn't have to buy. So why wit and wisdom at the state level? So the cog in the wheel, right? First off, you've got SCORE. SCORE Tennessee has been pushing wit and wisdom since 2015. They piloted it in the LIFT districts. I forgot to add in their number, but it's in the millions, their revenue. They got a lot of money pushing wit and wisdom. Johns Hopkins, they backed wit and wisdom and Amplify, and they do have ties to Penny Schwinn. But they were the ones that came in at the high level to overrule the original, remember the review, and they said that this is going to be good. And, all right, for Great Minds, somehow the previous version of this presentation is in here and not the new one. Great Minds was also pushing, and I can't remember what it said. And then there's the Gates Foundation's involved. So you can find newspaper articles that say As of 2019, there's $34 million from the Gates Foundation into Tennessee education, $17 million to SCORE. They're also a donor to Johns Hopkins. They're a donor to Great Minds and Ed Reports and Chiefs for Change and Teach for America and others. I hesitate to mention the Gates Foundation, but when they're in everything, bears mentioning. So why wit and wisdom from the county side? Well, first you've got the free supplemental material. So it's a financial incentive in the form of a savings, possibly to the tune of over $1 million. I've seen some numbers and then those numbers have disappeared. I'm trying to get them back, but I've got a FOIA request in on that. Also, the state promised $16 to $18 per pupil. It was highly rated by Ed Reports. So we've met with almost every single school board member and asked the question, why wit and wisdom? Did you read the books? Did you see the material? And the answer is no, but it was highly rated. We'll get into that. And then also, could it be ideology in the current climate of diversity, equity, inclusion, and wit and wisdom marries up with that? Could that also have played a factor? So a closer look at Ed Reports. And if you went to CRT 101, then you know diversity, inclusion, and equity are CRT. So this is a firm that is highly rating wit and wisdom for us. This is a statement by their executive director. Systemic racism in our educational system and country. Already initiated a 3-year plan to embed diversity, belonging, inclusion, and equity in all we do. And a closer look at Great Minds. Could Great Minds be steeped in ideology? Anti-racist. Everybody knows that anti-racism, or maybe you don't. I'm not going to get into that as a different brief, but anti-racism actually promotes racism. An anti-racist approach to education, and instead of textbooks, they want these works of, you saw the individual books, for social emotional learning needs. Well, I think we've seen that, right? So, the Gates Foundation in Tennessee, again, not something I normally include, but the more I look into this, the more I see it everywhere. So it bears mentioning. SCORE stands for State Collaborative on Reforming Education. They received $17 million over the last 10 years. SCORE pushed wit and wisdom. Great Minds. They've donated to Great Minds PBC since, and that's it's a nonprofit version of an LLC. It's not my specialty, but since 2008 when it was Common Core Inc., that's how they started. They went from 285,000 to 66.8 million. Ed Reports. The Gates Foundation also donates to Ed Reports. Johns Hopkins. The Gates Foundation also donates to Johns Hopkins. And Johns Hopkins covers for wit and wisdom. And then Chiefs for Change, they are leaders of state and district education. There's a lot of donations to them as well. So in this whole self-looking ice cream cone of money, where are the kids? It's just money changing hands. The educational industrial complex is worth $7 billion in Tennessee. So that's where we come in. You have to be the engaged parent, the engaged grandparent, the engaged citizen. Be on the watchtower for your kids. Be on the lookout, because our little babies are defenseless here in elementary school, so it's up to us. All right, Moms for Liberty, our take on all of this, because everybody wants to know what our stance is. You could probably guess it already, but Wit and wisdom is social emotional learning with pockets of implicit critical race theory, and Lori covered that in detail. Wit and wisdom never actually passed a single state textbook review, and it appears it was not well reviewed at the county level either. The potential detrimental effects of wit and wisdom on young minds is without question, and we have evidence of that in Williamson County with parents that have come forward with damaged children, and I'm talking stories that'll rip your heart out. Dark thoughts, ashamed of their grandparents, that their family should be dead, characterizing George Washington as a white man. And that's the aim of critical race theory, is it not? You're not judging George Washington on the merits of what he did for our country, but you're judging him on the color of his skin. It flies in the face of the ideals that Martin Luther King set for all of us to aspire to. And we see the evidence of money, not what's best for the children, being the driving factor behind wit and wisdom, to say nothing of the ideology driving the money. But for us, what ultimately matters, the only thing that matters, is that kid sitting in the desk in the classroom with this stuff in front of him. So this is what we covered. I hope you found it helpful.
Wow, yeah.
So what do? So you as a parent, a grandparent, an educator, a citizen, be engaged. But draw your own conclusions. I'm a fan of diversity of thought. I'm not here to indoctrinate you to my way of thinking. Personally, I think wit and wisdom is a bad deal. You draw your own conclusions. Most of the information that we have presented was not well known, if not known at all, and we wanted to bring it to light. Again, over 15 parents of Moms for Liberty invested over 1,200 hours of their time. There are more than a few nights where I'll be up at 2 or 3 in the morning working on this. And I will put into our group chat a question, expecting it to be answered in the morning when everybody wakes up. And I've got 2 or 3 people that they're up at the same time working on it as well that chime in to answer. That is extraordinary. That is absolute dedication on the part of these parents, and my hat is off to them. The handouts that you guys have, that's an incredible amount of work. And they were scrambling to get it done in time for this. So I honor and I respect and I thank all of you. So what to do with the information? Again, you've got the spreadsheets. If you look at the bottom left corner, there's a little web address where we're going to post the spreadsheets there. There's also in the middle of the page, it says current as of 14 June. It is a work in progress because, believe it or not, we have not made it through all of the books despite our very best efforts. So if you go to download it, you can just check in the middle to see if you have the most current version. And again, we'll make those available, and we'll make this brief available at that site as well. So you have the information. One is 5 pages, one is 7 pages. And the font is teeny tiny. It's going to take some time to get through. But I hope you read it and you form your own conclusions. I hope you look at the books in the back and see that we're not pulling anything. This is exactly what is presented to your kids. And know that Wit and Wisdom review is what's going to be reviewed at the work session this Thursday by the school board. We're going to see what, while we've been doing this, Assistant Superintendent Dave Allen has been doing his own review. He even surveyed the teachers. However, that survey was not anonymous. So we believe that we have a different point of view. We hope that the school board has been informed by the information that we brought forward. They are the next step above the parents in protecting our kids, so we're relying on them. So tune in, and then again, the next date after that is Monday of next week. That is the board meeting, and I would encourage you all to come. One moment, if I may. Is Jamie here? Did he leave? Jamie, come here.
How long have they been teaching this already?
1 year. So, Moms for Liberty had a heck of a time finding a venue. And Jamie here stepped up and offered his place of business. of a true patriot and a true statesman in the community. So, what can I give in gratitude for that kind of dedication and service? And I wanted to give you this. I took the nameplate off because it's being modified for Moonshine Harley Davidson, but this is a flag that I flew in the B-1 over Afghanistan and actually released weapons in support of our troops on the ground. And I want you to have it.